we have found ourselves, or I have found myself in a situation where it's more of a week to week kind of a series, and I'm never that guy. I have my stuff laid out, and I've been prayed it, and all of that. And 3 weeks ago, I had planned on starting the book of Amos, and Lord woke me up and said, "How about Psalm 1?" And it was, I don't know how to tell you that. I mean, I know some people think, God doesn't speak today. Well, I didn't hear a voice, but if I wake up 2 or 3 times in the middle of the night, which was 3 times that night, and I'm quoting that psalm, I'm assuming God's stirring something. And so I woke up and I began to study that. Last week we ended up looking at a powerful psalm, Psalm 23, because I had been studying John 10, where Jesus is that he's the door and he's the shepherd. And so I'm like, all right. So this week I thought, I see what we're doing. Well, we're meandering through the Psalms. Okay, I'm cool with that, right? And so I'm looking at a few Psalms this week, and I'm like, okay, we could do this one, we could do that one. And yesterday, something like I told you, I've been blocking out time, and I've been writing a kid's book. I've been writing this book for about 2 years because I piddled with it, and I need to finish it. And so I blocked time out, and I've been finishing this book. It's a kid's book. It may not mean much to you, but it means the world to me. And I believe it has the opportunity to change kids' perspectives in life. It's a fun book. And so it's called Eli's Magical Shipwreck Zoo. And so my grandkids are some of the key players in it, along with some little creatures that I created years ago when we were sitting at the beach called Bert and Sandy, and they're seagulls. And it's a fun book. Well, in the middle of it, as Eli's trying to capture his zoo, I think he comes to the realization that the animals have families too. And is he right in separating them from that? And so in the book, and when you write books, when you write from an imaginary sort of way and creative way, the book writes itself. I don't want to get kind of mystical, but it just writes itself because you just sit and you imagine, and so you start writing, and it just kind of comes out, and then you realize, wow, now I'm in a corner. How am I going to get out of that? And so you begin to think, and I'll go this way, and so it just kind of writes itself. It's a strange way of doing things. James Patterson, one of the greatest writers of our time, most prolific. I took one of his courses on writing, and he says this is exactly how it happened. So I feel comfortable in where I am. So one of the chapters I wrote, Eli's up early in the morning because he's bothered, and he comes sit by Poppy, and he starts asking questions about, do animals have families, and what's going on there, and what does God say about it? So in that, then you have to stop writing and you start researching. And so I just went all the way through the scriptures to see what God has to say about animals and how many animals there are in the scriptures and all of those things. And in the middle of that, what I've discovered, which is why we're going to be looking at Psalm 19 today, it's not about the animals, but it is about creation. Because God doesn't distinguish much, though he does love us intimately. When he gave a covenant to Noah of the rainbow, he didn't give it just to man. He didn't give it just to Noah and his family. He said, and the animals, and to my creation. And so when he goes through the scriptures, you'll see that he loves his creation every bit as much as he does you. It's a different love, but he loves it. He loves the animals every bit as much as he does for you. He loves us different, greater depth, but he loves them. And when you get to the book of Job, man, Job is an amazing book on just a study in creation. I mean, I'm tempted to want to preach that at some point. But in the book of Job, he says, I create a stream in a desert that nobody's going to see, but I do it because there's a plant there that I want to water. If you and I could slow down long enough to consider how vast God's mind is, there's no depth, there's no finish to it. And so he can see a flower where nobody else does, and he goes, I'm not doing this for y'all. I'm not doing this for your pleasure. You'll never see that stream. I'm doing it because I created that flower, and I love that flower, and I'm going to create that stream so it'll have life. See, we think God too small. And so yesterday as I'm writing, I'm like, okay, Psalm 19, that's where we're going, right? And so that's where we're going to be. The heavens tell the glory of God. And this is a powerful psalm. It's going to take us 2 weeks to get through this one. And so I just want us to see the first part today And we're going to look at just 6 verses. I want to read the whole psalm to you as we kind of just get into this. So understand, this one is by David. And as he wrote the psalms, these were meant to be sung. David sitting out in the fields, we don't know when he wrote this one, but some of the ones he wrote, he's just a shepherd, man. He's out in the field. He's a shepherd boy, right? He's got his sheep. He's on the mountainside. Sometimes he has the night watch. Remember, he talks about that. Man, how I love the night watch, right? And so he's just journaling. He's a shepherd boy journaling, got his sheep, looking at creation, and at some point he must have written, "The heavens declare the glory of God," right? And so I can imagine sitting on the hillside looking at that, right? And just studying that, and then just thinking, God is everywhere. And so he writes this psalm meant to be sung, and that's why it says, and it is in the scriptures itself, for the music director, a psalm of David. So what he says here is, hey, I know you got, I know you're the music leader, but I'm gonna write you a song. All right, but can you make sure we sing it when we make our way up to the court, right? Right, and we enter his gates with thanksgiving. That's another one that he wrote. Those are psalms of ascent, right? So he wrote some of those to say, remember when he said, it is good when they said, let us go to the house of the Lord, right? So he starts writing these songs just for us to sing on our journey to gather with God's people. And so this one is just one that is one of the psalms that he wrote. And so let's just listen to it. I'm reading in the New American Standard. I know that may be a little clunky for you, but it's what I like. So I'm going to read it. You may be in the New International, whatever you're in. That's cool. Let's just look at it together. The heavens tell of the glory of God, and their expanse declares the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There's no speech, nor are there words. The voice is not heard. Their line, though, has gone out into all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has placed a tent for the sun, which is like a groom coming out of his chamber. It rejoices like a strong person to run its course. Its rising is from one end of the heavens, and its circuit to the other end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat. Now, what that lets me know is that when I look up, the sky declares the glory of God. Now, all creation does is declare God. Doesn't explain God, right? It just declares God. And so that's why all men are without excuse, Romans says. But now he moves in verse 7 to say, now we're going to look down at the scriptures. So we look at the sky and we understand there is a God. We look at the scriptures and he explains the God. And this is what he does then in verse 7. The law of the Lord is perfect, man, restoring the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The command of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true. They are righteous altogether. They are more desirable than gold, much more than pure gold. Sweeter also than honey, and the drippings of the honeycomb. Moreover, your servant is warned by them. In keeping them there is great reward. So now he's shifted from looking up to the sky, looking down to the word, to looking in toward myself and going, what will I do with this? What will I do with the fact that the creation declares there is a God? The scriptures explain who he is. What will I do in light of that? And he says this, who can discern his errors? Acquit me of hidden faults. Who can help me figure myself out? Also, keep your servant back from presumptuous sins. Let them not rule over me. Then I will be innocent and I will be blameless. I need help, God. I know creation says who you are. I know the word explains who you are. And in light of that, I realize I need you. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Man. Isn't that good? We just read that all day and be done. So let's break it down because I'm going to teach. So the first thing he says is creation speaks. Right? That's why we sang that song, So Will I. Right? Remember? And he always personifies creation, doesn't he? When he says, hey man, if you don't cry out, these rocks will. Right? And so you see it all through there. Here he's saying, man, the heavens declare the glory of God. We get so distracted. It's amazing. Yesterday, Tammy and I were eating lunch, and I looked over the table, and there were 3 people sitting there, and every one of them had their phone out, and they're just staring at it, while they eat. And I'm like, why'd y'all come together? I mean, if that's what's going on, right? And you see it everywhere people are. Because I used to walk the streets a good bit in Birmingham, not so much these days because I have other issues going on, but I would walk and I would pray, and man, it's amazing how many people just walk up and down the street. They're just staring at their phone. I'd have to get out of everybody's way because, and so I guess I think Satan has done a great job of distracting us so that we don't pay attention to creation. But isn't it interesting when people go to their happy place, it's not their computer? Sometimes, rarely is it their home, right? It's either going to be the beach or the mountains. Why is that? Because there's something about creation that calls us to something bigger than ourselves. And I don't think we understand the psychology behind that. But why is it that when you're depressed, you just want to go sit at the beach and just watch those waves roll in? And why is it that there it's like your problems tend to go away? Or why is it that when you hike and you make your way up to the top of a mountain and you're working through that and you just see the glory of everything and you can look and see 3 or 4 ranges down, why is it all of a sudden you feel like somebody's just kind of taking this weight of heaviness off of you and you can just breathe? It's because that's what we were created for, to enjoy this creation that God has given to us. And I just think that I think I've been listening. I do a lot of different little Netflix things, learning. So I looked at a series the other day called Ancient Apocalypse. It's all about the Ice Age and all the empires that kind of were there around it. And it studied all these pyramids. We think of pyramids, we think of Egypt, but there are pyramids also in the Mayan ruins, and I've seen some of those. And they have some in Papua New Guinea, and they're there. And they have some in South Africa. They have them everywhere, all very ancient. And if you start studying all of those deals, they align themselves with the sun and with creation. And they're very methodical with what they do. And it's amazing to me that in the ancient days, before distractions that we tend to have, they worked with the land, not on the land. These days, we rarely work with the land. And I'm not trying to get all this philosophical with you. I just think it's important that we understand that creation is meant, God gave it to us so that we would know there is a God. This is what he says. The heavens tell of the glory of God, and their expanse declares the work of his hand. When you start looking at the expanse of that, it's hard to see the stars these days, though, in our culture, right? But if you can we were in Colorado, in Vail, Colorado. We were heading to a little city, and we snowmobiled there. And so we took our snowmobiles, we inched up the hairpin turn, got to this place called Big Park, and then we raced across it. And the sun hadn't even come up, and we were waiting for our buddies there. And I remember we turned the snowmobiles off, we're sitting there, feels like miles away from civilization. And you could hear the breeze, you could see the dust of the snow as it kind of just was wafting around. And then you could look up, and I've never seen so many stars in all my life. They were just everywhere. And just this quietness of this majestic place. I remember one night some friends of ours invited us to go down to Dauphin Island with them, and we got there and we were sitting on the deck. And Dauphin Island is kind of a quiet little beach on the eastern side of Mobile. And the sand isn't as pretty because the way the bay does it, but it's you're not crowded. You're not running all over people. And you could build a fire out there. We're sitting out there around this fire. It's at night, and man, the stars just start what we call falling, and they were just showering everywhere. I bet we spent an hour just watching these things just fall, and it's crazy, all of that. And I think we just don't do that. And this is what he's saying, man. The expanse declares the work of his hands. Day to day pours forth speech. Now this is his metaphor. It doesn't speak, does it? Words don't come out. But Tammy and I were riding down the road, was it yesterday, the day before? Oh, we head up to Appalachian to watch basketball. And man, when you get to go through the Appalachian area up just north of us where Asheville is on one side and Appalachia's on the other, and you come around these things. Man, that sun, and I hate to say it like this, but it was one of those Auburn skies. You know what I mean? That coming out of my mouth even has a bad taste. But it had that purple sky, and the blue, and then it had that orange streak in it, and you just have to comment on it. We're in the middle of a conversation. She goes, "Look at that," and I'm like, "Yeah, I already saw it. I'm looking at it too." We forgot the conversation because you just see that, and you go, "Oh, that's crazy." There are times, man, when I'm heading down the mountain early in the morning, that sun's coming up over those mountains over there in Moody. It's crazy.
That's why we like to go camping.
Isn't that right? It's exactly why people do that kind of stuff. And that moon, the moon seemed so, them and the other day, it was one of those, I forgot what moon it was, but it was the biggest thing I'd ever seen in my life. I thought, that can't be real. That's got to be fake. It was so big. How do you look at that? And I mean, it's insane. And so when David is writing this, I picture him sitting on the hillside with his sheep around him, right? And maybe a couple of guys with him. And he's saying, "Hey, man, I got to tell you, I got to write this. The heaven declares the glory of God, and their expanse declares the work of his hands. Who could have made these things?" Day to day, I see it, and it just screams at me that there's a God in heaven. And night to night reveals knowledge. We've gotten so dumb now, we don't really understand the stars and how they work, and we couldn't name all of the Orion and the Big Dipper. We couldn't name all of those constellations. But the old days, they knew about those. Every ancient civilization built their life around the constellation of the stars. You go to the book of Job, little sidebar. Job speaks of Orion and his belt. And if you know anything about Orion's belt, we learned in 1947 that those stars, they're not one star, but they're a cluster of stars, and they move. We didn't learn that until 1947, unless you read the book of Job, and he speaks of it. See, this is why you don't buy the lie when people tell you that's just a fairy tale book, or that's just a myth. Explain that to me then, homeboy. Tell me how that happened, right? Tell me how you couldn't find out until 1947, but Job, a book you call a fairy tale written years before, and you want to say it's a bunch of garbage. Tell me how he knew that. Just answer that question for me, and I'll shut up. But you can't answer it. You know why? Because there is a God in heaven. Man, I get a little feisty and angry because I talk to so many people who just mock me every day about how I'm like, man, you are so stupid. That's what I want to say. They're just fools. That's what the Bible calls them. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. I just want you and me today to understand what this is saying here. Listen to what he says in verse 3. There is no speech, nor are there words. Their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out into all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Though their speech isn't seen or heard, it screams at us. And this is what he goes on to say. And it's amazing. We were listening. We were listening last night to there's a series that it's old now, but it's called The Trail of Tears, the Cherokee documentary. And I don't know if you know much about that or not, but I'm kind of drawn toward that culture right now. We're looking at some things, so the Cherokee Nation was here before we were, right? Settled all in here. George Washington and all the others understood that they deserved a right to live in a place like we did. And when they created, and Jefferson created the Declaration of Independence, and it talks about all men creating equal, we didn't treat them that way, but they knew that to be true. It was only a matter of time before they would create that. Well, Andrew Jackson, on the other hand, decided to create a removal act saying that it was to take care of the Cherokee Nation and keep them safe. The only thing it was keeping them safe from was the people who wanted their land. That's all it was about. And when the gold rush hit Dahlonega, Georgia, that was the nail in the coffin for the Cherokees, because they told them you can't have the gold, even though it's on their land. And they told them, you can have the land if you'll start acting like us. And the Cherokee Nation did. All the others, they fled. The Cherokee Nation, they started living in houses. They learned how to be more productive. They learned the language. They learned all of those things, and still they were shoved out of here and told to go to Oklahoma And it was a destructive, terrible time in our nation's history that we don't want to talk about. But in that deal, if you read the journals of some of those Cherokee tribes, as they moved beyond the Appalachian Mountains, which you and I have the privilege of living in, they would turn back and they would look at the mountain and they would weep and they would say, they would cry out to the mountain, "Thank you for the privilege of living," because they knew they were never going to see it again. We don't treat creation like that. And I'm not saying we worship it, but I'm saying we don't honor it we don't appreciate this vast, incredible world that God has given to us. It screams to us every day that God has lavished us by giving us a world like this, right? I mean, think about it. Have you been to the depths of the ocean and have you seen? I mean, you don't have to snorkel is all you have to do sometime in the Caribbean to see colors that Crayola knows nothing about, right? I mean, it's an amazing place, just what's down there, and come face to face with these creatures. And you see those things. You look at I don't want to sound poetic, but you look at a bald eagle in flight. Man, we were at the lake last fall in Wadowee. And that eagle, I bet it didn't feel like it was half a football field from us. It may have been closer than that. And it's swirling around. And you could tell it just knew it was king of the air. I mean, you know what I'm saying? You can do this with people. You can look at people and go, "Man, you think you're something, don't you?" But that eagle knows it's something. And when it was swirling around, it had no fear. It didn't worry about a thing because it knew whatever came at it, it was bigger than. And I think, how do you see that and not go, that didn't just happen? I mean, it's just crazy. Nobody rides through Birmingham looking at these buildings and go, "Wow, look at that. Wonder how many millions of years it took for that building just to form like that," right? If I started saying that publicly, you'd be going, "Hey man, we probably ought to call Bryce or kind of send him to the loony bin," right? Wouldn't you say that? Would you say I'm a crazy man if I said that house, I don't know how long it's been there. I mean, they say they just built it, but how could it have happened, man? Right? Why would we say that about creation? The fool has said in his heart that there is no God. Then he says this, 4b, consider the sun, right? The line is going out in all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. In them he has placed a tent for the sun. Now that word tent's a little of a misnomer. I don't know what your Bible said. I didn't study that one. But in the force of the Hebrew language, it literally means kind of a track, right? So when it thinks of tent, it thinks of what happens. You know how you kind of create a tent if you're going to go from one place to another, kind of thing. It's a chute, right? They'll do that in lots of places. So it's more like a carpet, like you're going somewhere. That's more the idea of what it's saying here. But listen to what it says. Its rising is from one end of the heavens and its circuit to the other end of them. He's like, just look at the sun, man. It starts over here and it bursts out of here and it makes its way over to the other circuit and it hits it and then it kind of bounces back over and we see it come around again, right? And this is what he's speaking of, and this is what we see. And then he says it's like this. He says it's circuit of. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. In them he placed a tent for the sun, which is like a groom coming out of his chamber. And Jackson got married the other day. He wasn't real sulky about what was going on. I watched him walk. He walked like a proud man. Kind of strutted, if I could say that word. I think because he caught like the prime, woman that you could catch, right? Obvious so, because when he had his first look and he turns around and sees her, we got a picture, not to diminish him at all, because it's a powerful thing when a man can weep, but he's crying because he realizes what a catch the Lord has given to him. So when he comes walking down with me, there's a strutting step. Why? It's his day, right? This is what he says the sun is like a groom coming out of its chamber, right? It's like the sun is like, it's my turn again, right? I mean, just personify that whole thing. The sun's going, it's my turn to shine again. It loves that deal. And then he says this, or it's like that strong person ready to run its course, right? He's ready. He's on his mark, man. The sun is ready just hit the button when the Lord shouts, now, boom, he's off. And this is exactly how he speaks of it here. And then he says its rising is from one end of the heavens and its circuit to the other, and nothing is hidden from its heat. Man, this is good. You know, without the sun, you and I wouldn't be here. You may remember probably fourth grade science and photosynthesis. Do you remember that term? Some of you medical people may know that. So you've got a little plant, right? And in the ground, it's got water and it's got minerals, right? And it begins to move its way up the tree, just right? And it settles into the leaves. And the leaves have that stomata, right? The little pores in it, right? Remember that? And so it lets oxygen in there. And those three components create what's called raw sap, right? Minerals, water, and oxygen. Now, in that little leaf is that chlorophyll, right? Sitting there, waiting on the sun to penetrate it, and create energy, and then it mixes together, and that becomes elevated sap, and that's what feeds that tree. And so that tree blossoms. And the added part of that elevated sap is what comes out in the form of an apple or a carrot if it's in the root. But whatever it is, it's there, and it's nourishment for us to eat. And then you and I and the animals, the herbivores, thank God for them, eat that stuff, right? And then we carnivores eat that. But without the sun to do that with the plant, herbivores don't eat, carnivores don't eat, we're all dead. All of us are dead. And so sometimes I just think we forget about science in those things. I was so busy studying history, I forgot about science. I'm trying to catch up these days. But it's amazing what happens. And you know what else it does? It creates the oxygen so that you and I have something to breathe. Now here's a tidbit I didn't know. When the sun goes down and that plant normally puts off carbon dioxide, at night it puts off oxygen too. I didn't know that until today when I was studying some of this stuff. Now, so creation is God's gift. We're at the end of this. I just kind of want to speak just for a minute, just kind of wrap some things up. I want to read a couple of passages. But remember in Genesis 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? So we know that, even though the world wants to ignore that. If I get, I love this passage in Isaiah chapter 40. Let me just read it to you. Do you know? Have you not heard? Has it not been declared to you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is He who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out to the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to live in. It is He who reduces rulers to nothing, who makes the judges of the earth meaningless. Scarcely have they been planted, and scarcely have they been sown. Scarcely has their stock taken root in the earth, but He merely blows them, and they wither. He's talking about men. We rise and we fall. We're nothing. To whom then will you compare me, that I would be His equal, says the Holy One? Raise your eyes on high, and see who has created these stars. The one who brings out their multitude by number, He calls them by name. Because of the greatness of His might and the strength of His power, not one of them is missing. I know this sounds like, elementary stuff to you, but it's just powerful. John 1 says this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God. In the beginning, all things came into being through Him, and apart from Him, not even one thing came into being that has come into being. In Him was life, and the life was the light of mankind. Let me read one more passage, maybe two. Listen to this. Nobody wants to talk about this passage, especially today, but listen to what it says. For the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of people who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because that which is known about God is evident within them. For God made it evident to them. For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes, that is, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, being understood by what has been made, so that they are without excuse. You see what I'm saying? I think Satan's doing a great job of keeping people from looking at creation. Look at that phone. Binge on Netflix. Do this, do that. Stay inside. Don't do that. Get get distracted doing 1,000 things. And I think this is what's happening. Listen to what he says. For even though they knew God, right? They know there's a God. They did not honor him as God or give thanks, but they became futile in their reasonings, and their senseless hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of the incorruptible God for an image in the form of a corruptible man, a bird, four-footed animals, and crawling creatures. So they see all the creation, and instead of worshiping the God who created that, they worship the creation. You see that in Roman and in all the other empires, right? They would worship all of these animals and all of these things, and you would see that. Therefore, God gave them up to vile impurity and lust of their hearts, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for falsehood and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator. And then God speaks about degrading passions and all of those things. The ancients worshiped creation, and then we have tended to worship the creature. And this is where we are. One more quick thing. Evolution has been around relatively new. It was a part of the Enlightenment in the 1700s. Jean Baptiste de Monnet was an enlightened individual, so to speak, and began to talk about the theory of origins. Charles Darwin's grandfather was in that same era, and he also wrote a book on the theory of origins. See, we don't know that about Darwin. We think he just created stuff on his own. No. Listen, his grandfather perpetrated that garbage. And Darwin was just a product of it. And so when Darwin comes along in 1859 writing his theory of evolution, it was a theory. What were they trying to do there? I don't want to believe God got that. So let's figure out a way to make it not God so we can not have to worship him, right? And so Darwin creates this theory of evolution. Well, by the time your kids are in school today, it's not theory anymore, is it? It's fact. It's fact. Science. Trust the science. Right? Who's the truth denier? Us or them? Right? I mean, let's just be honest. Don't take a back seat to all these people saying, well, you're just a science denier. Well, you're a truth denier. And if you want to talk about conspiracy theories, let's talk about those. That's the biggest conspiracy theory on the planet. Let's conspire together that there is no God and prove it by this garbage of evolution so that we don't have to deal with God. I'm going to leave it at that. Otherwise, I'll start ranting, and I don't want to rant today. I want to preach. But how powerful is this? I love this text and what it says, and I'm glad you let me rant and share it and think about it. Listen, you and I have great boldness in who God is. You take somebody who doesn't believe there's a God, grab them by their little hand, and you drag them outside, and you show them creation and said, explain to me how that got here in a way that you know it. Because evolution is not it. It defies science. You're the science denier, not me. Lord bless you guys. Hey, let's just sing.